In the late 1960s, as the world swayed to the rhythm of counterculture revolutions, where peace and love mingled with rebellion and confusion, a new spiritual movement emerged, one that promised truth, liberation, and divine connection in a world that seemed to be slipping into chaos. But behind the slogans of salvation and freedom, behind the hymns and heavenly smiles, something far more disturbing was quietly taking root. It was the birth of a movement that would one day come to be known as the Family International, originally called the Children of God. What began as a seemingly innocent Christian sect would evolve into one of the most controversial and unsettling cults of modern times. Its founder, David Brantberg, was a man raised under the intense glare of religious devotion. His mother was a fiery evangelist, and David himself was deeply entrenched in the Pentecostal tradition. Yet despite, or perhaps because of, his religious upbringing, Berg became disillusioned with mainstream churches. He saw them as dead institutions, devoid of spirit, trapped in tradition. In 1968, during the height of the hippie movement, he found fertile ground among the youth, those who had rejected conventional religion, politics, and materialism. They were searching for something more, something real, something transcendent. Berg stepped into that void with charisma, scripture, and radical teachings. Berg's early followers called themselves Teens for Christ, and they traveled across the United States preaching a message of love, communal living, and the soon-coming end of the world. They lived in buses, abandoned buildings, and parks, sharing everything, including food, clothing, and often even their personal relationships. To many outsiders, they appeared to be a quirky but harmless Christian group. But inside their ranks, a very different kind of gospel was taking shape, one centered not just on Jesus, but on the absolute authority of David Berg himself, who would soon become known as Moses David, or simply Father David. As the group grew in size and spread across continents, Berg began issuing letters, long, rambling spiritual missives that became the backbone of the group's beliefs. These Mo letters, as they came to be called, were filled with apocalyptic warnings, mystical interpretations of Scripture, and increasingly disturbing doctrines about sex, power, and obedience. Berg taught that the traditional morality of the world was flawed, even satanic. He claimed that true spiritual liberation came from breaking down all barriers, especially sexual ones. By the 1970s, Berg had begun promoting a practice that would become one of the group's darkest hallmarks: flirty fishing. In this twisted evangelistic tactic, female members were encouraged, sometimes coerced, to use their sexuality to lure men into the fold. These women, called fisher women, were told that seducing strangers was a form of divine love, a way to spread the message of Jesus. They were sent to nightclubs, beaches, hotels, wherever lonely men could be found. It is estimated that over 100,000 men were approached through this method over the years. Some even fathered children, who were known inside the group as Jesus babies. Berg, hidden away in secluded compounds and communicating only through his Mo letters, wielded almost godlike control over his followers. He saw himself as the voice of God on earth, and to question him was tantamount to blasphemy. Members were required to live in communal homes, surrender their possessions, and abide by strict spiritual and sexual regulations. Children were raised in the system, often separated from their biological parents and brought up by the collective. Education was minimal, usually focused on Berg's writings and basic religious instruction. But as the years passed, whispers of abuse began to surface, whispers that would one day explode into global scandal. Behind the smiling faces and musical performances, behind the mission work and colorful posters, there was something sinister happening to the youngest members. Former members began to speak out about a culture of control, exploitation, and systematic sexual abuse of children. In the group's most extreme periods during the 1970s and 1980s, It was not uncommon for children to be exposed to sexually explicit literature, encouraged to participate in sexual activities, or used in pornographic material distributed within the cult. David Berg continued to justify his teachings with scripture, twisting biblical passages into endorsements of the unthinkable. He taught that love knew no bounds, not even between adults and children. Though the group eventually claimed to have banned adult-child sexual contact in the late 1980s under international pressure and legal scrutiny, the damage had already been done. Many of the children who had grown up inside the group carried lifelong scars, emotional, psychological, and physical. One of the most tragic stories emerged in 2005 when Ricky Rodriguez, also known as Davidito, took his own life after murdering a former cult member. Ricky had been raised as a poster child of the movement. From infancy, he was photographed, documented, and groomed to be the spiritual heir of Berg. But behind the camera was a childhood marked by relentless abuse and indoctrination. His murder-suicide was not only a personal tragedy, but a public cry against the horrors he had endured. It brought renewed attention to the group and forced the world to re-examine what had been allowed to fester in the shadows. David Berg died in 1994, leaving behind a legacy of contradictions. A man hailed as a prophet by his followers and reviled as a predator by his critics. After his death, his wife, Karen Zerby, took over leadership of the group. She, too, had lived in seclusion, issuing guidance through ghost-written letters, often under the name Mama Maria. Under her leadership, the group attempted to rebrand itself. They changed their name to the Family of Love, and later to the Family International. They distanced themselves from some of their earlier doctrines, especially those involving sexuality and child-rearing. But the internet age made secrecy harder. Survivor stories flooded forums, interviews, and documentaries. Lawsuits were filed. Former members banded together to share their trauma, support one another, and seek justice. Despite its transformation, the Family International today remains a shadow of its former self. The apocalyptic fervor has faded, the communal homes have largely dissolved, and many of its older members have retreated into anonymity. Yet the ghosts of its past continue to haunt. The children who were raised under its doctrines have spoken out about the psychological conditioning, the isolation from the outside world, the denial of formal education, and the ever-present fear of divine punishment. Many of them have struggled to adapt to normal life, facing depression, trust issues, and a deep sense of betrayal, not just by a religious leader, but by the adults who were supposed to protect them. What makes the story of the children of God so chilling is not only what was done in secret, but how it was cloaked in the language of love, purity, and salvation. It is a cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked power, of charismatic leadership turned tyrannical, of faith used as a weapon rather than a refuge. It reminds us that evil often does not come with horns and fire, but in the gentle voice of a trusted prophet, in the embrace of community, in the promise of divine truth. For those who lived through it, the journey of healing is long and complex. Some have forgiven. Some have cut all ties. Some continue to wrestle with their beliefs, wondering how something so wrong could have felt so right at the time. But in telling their stories, they reclaim their voice. They expose the cracks in systems that enable abuse, and they remind the world that no belief, no matter how noble it sounds, should ever come at the cost of a child's innocence or a human being's freedom. The Children of God began as a quest for spiritual purity, but became a twisted mirror of everything it claimed to oppose. It started with love songs on the street and ended in exile, scandal, and silence. And though its name may have changed and its numbers may have dwindled, its story stands as one of the most harrowing chapters in the modern history of religious movements. Not because it existed, but because it endured for so long before the world dared to look inside.